Hey guys, and it's time to do October's block. We're down to the end, and so we have October and November, and then in December we're going to be doing the borders and the sashing. So I've already done one of October's blocks, so we've got to do the second one. So let's get started. Okay, in your kit, you're going to have the two background pieces and then the two yellow pieces that are the applique pieces for the flower. And then your prep work, you're going, in the instructions it says to iron the SF 101 onto the back of the background piece. And then I went ahead and ironed a piece onto the flower. And then you're going to need to cut you a piece of the batting, 6x8. That's the finished size. And then I went ahead while I was cutting my SF101 and the batting for next month's block. It's going to be 6.5 by 8.5 also. So I went ahead and cut my two SF101 pieces for the backgrounds and my two batting pieces, the 6x8. So I just have those ready for next month. Then as far as the stabilizers for this month's block, you're going to need the poly mesh or the light mesh cutaway that we've been using for all of the blocks. And then you're also going to need some aqua mesh. Now, I was going to talk to you about these two stabilizers. They look very similar to each other, and so this is one reason you really want to keep the wrappers with your rolls of stabilizer so you can tell the difference. So I know this one is the aqua mesh, but you can and what I've done in the past is, if I'm not sure what is what, which one's which, I'll take just a little piece of it and go run it under water and see if it dissolves. But you can kind of tell. I want Bailey to kind of zoom in a little bit. You can tell the difference, just the look of the two stabilizers. This one on the right is the cutaway, the poly mesh, and then this one on the left is the aqua mesh. The way I kind of remember is the poly mesh has kind of more of a bigger weave type look to it. So I just always think, okay, fabric has a woven effect to it and it's permanent, so that's the cutaway, where the aqua mesh has more of the little bitty holes, and so it's going to dissolve. So I mean, just kind of a way of kind of telling, the difference is more the poly mesh has more of the weave, the aqua mesh is just more, it has more kind of little holes in there, so it's more of a mesh type look. So what you're going to do, first of all, before we start the flower design, you're going to hoop up two pieces of the aqua mesh, so the water soluble. And you can do this in your smaller hoop, your 4x4 hoop, or on the Berninas it's the smaller medium hoop. But you want to hoop up two pieces, and what you're going to be doing first are the little freestanding lace flowers. Now I went ahead and I've stitched off both sets of flowers at one time, and I'm going to show you in the machine how you can combine them together and everything. And so for the flowers, you're going to need your smaller hoop, the two pieces of the aqua mesh, and then whatever color you want to do your flowers out of, you can do them any color you want. You want to wind a bobbin to match that spool of thread. Okay, so on your USB stick or with your files, you are going to have 3 files this month. You have 2 flowers, and I'm going to be emailing you Lori's 5x7, okay, for October, and I'm going to explain why. It's for the very last stitch out when we're sewing the little lace flowers down. I kind of revised it, and so I will be emailing everybody that flower. But what we're going to need first are these little freestanding lace flowers. So we're going to go select those and set them, and I've pulled up my 4x4 hoop area, and so what I can do is just move this design down, and then easiest thing is go in and duplicate that. Once it's duplicated, what I'm going to do is just go in and rotate it 90 degrees a couple of times, and then just kind of nestle that in, and so now you have both sets there together, so you can stitch them off at one time. And then once you send them to the embroidery side or screen, go into layout, and you can hit the little 3 spools of thread, and that's going to color sort, and so it'll stitch all of the flower color at one time, and then the little placement marks that it's going to stitch off in the center. On the Berninas, it's basically the same step. So you're going to go select your flower, and then you can go into your edit screen, and I'm just going to move these down into the corner, and then this is your duplicate right here, the 2 little squares. That's going to duplicate it, and then hit your rotate and do the 90 degrees a couple of times, and you can move it around if you want to. And then close out of that, touch your needle, that's going to send you to the sewing screen, and then your 3 spools of thread here, that's your color sort, and so just touch that, and then that will group your colors together, so it'll stitch all of the pink and then the little placement lines in the center. And so you will just stitch those off onto your 2 layers of aqua mesh, and then once they're stitched off, just unhoop them, take your scissors and trim down as much as you can around each flower, or you can take a wet Q-tip, or if you have one of those little water pins, you can go around each flower and that dissolves the aqua mesh. And then I just ran them under water just a little bit. You don't want to wash the aqua mesh out completely. You just kind of wash it out until you get all the edges out from around the flower. And then I just laid them down and kind of, pushed them up just a little bit so they're not totally flat, so they had a little bit of dimension, and then you just let those dry. And so you might want to do this step, a few hours, the day, something like that. I think mine took, I want to say 4 or 5 hours to dry. So just get that done before we start in on the flower. Now on the instructions here on this part A, this is on page 2, it does tell you to have a bobbin wound with your flower color and then also the color of the little placement line. I didn't do that. I figured it's in the center, it's going to be stitched over when we tack those flowers down, so I just left the same pink color in my bobbin when I stitched the little placement line on the flowers. So that's up to you. Now as far as your thread colors, you're going to need the light and the dark green. The brown is what I used for the centers, and then I used the little kind of light peach color for the detail in the flower, the yellow for the placement line and tack down and cover stitch for the flower, and then the blue for those little flowers. And again, you can play with your colors. You can stitch off your flowers whatever color you want. Now on the machine, we're ready to do the quilting and everything. So we're going to go into the background quilting file on your USB stick, and we're going to pick the block by block, and we're choosing the 6x8. And then I'm just going to add the flower on top of it. Again, you can stitch this off and then bring in the flower to stitch it off, but I'm going to go ahead and combine them together. So I'm going to go back to the USB stick. This time we're going to go into the embroidery files, and you're going to get Lori's, okay? And then the placement for this on the instructions, it says it's centered, but it's all the way down to the, it's centered left to right, but we're going to move it all the way down to the bottom. So we're going to go into edit and move it straight down so that the bottom of that flower design is even with the bottom of your quilting design down there. And I've already threaded up with the off-white color of thread, and so we're going to stitch off the placement line for the batting. After it stitches the placement line for the batting, I'm just going to forward through that tack down for the batting, and it's going to go to the placement line for the fabric. And I forgot to tell you, you've hooped up your poly mesh stabilizer, your lightweight mesh stabilizer now, doing this just like we always have done. And while it's stitching that placement line, I'm going to go spray the back of my background fabric and my batting with the 505 spray. Now I'm going to lay my batting down inside that placement line for the batting. And then lay my fabric, center that over the placement line for the fabric. And then it's going to stitch the tack down, and then we'll just go directly into stitching the quilting. You do the quilting design, on your instructions it says, note, if doing the block by block quilting, skip to machine step 3. So you're skipping over the steps here, and machine step 3 is going to start stitching the stems. Now, I thought I would show you on a lot of your machines how you can actually remove those 2 steps that you don't want to stitch off. And so what I'm going to do is hit return and get back to the edit screen. And on the machines that have this no sew feature, you're going to go into there and see I've got that step selected right there, and you just hit the no sew option down there at the bottom, and then you select the next color, and it's the tack down for if you're not doing the quilting, and I can hit the no sew there, and it just removes those 2 steps completely. And you can do that before you even start sewing anything, and then get back into the embroidery. Now this is my quilting steps, so I'm just going to forward through those. I've already stitched the quilting off, and I could have no sewed the 2 steps in the quilting that we don't use, but now it's going directly to the stem. On the Berninas, the way you remove those 2 stitches that you don't want, and again, this is just on some of them, but if you pull up that flower and then go into your edit screen, you'll have this little icon right here. So what you're going to do is, you have the flower selected, you're going to touch that, and then you're going to hit the minus. And what that does is it ungroups, it separates each step, and see how that little placement line is highlighted right now. So then I can just hit the little trash can, and that deletes that step. And now the tack down is what's highlighted. Hit the trash can and delete that step. And so we've just removed those 2 steps that we don't want to stitch off on the screen. So now I'm just going to start stitching the embroidery design, and I'm just going to kind of keep filming the steps. I'm not going to actually narrate each step because you can follow it on your instructions until we get to the placement of our lace flowers. so we are now to the placement line, or the placement stitches for the little lace flowers. So we're on page 4 of your instructions on step 10, and it's just going to stitch off the little flower placement lines. I've gone ahead and I've threaded up with the brown color. That's what color I'm going to stitch off all of the little centers of the flowers with. So it's going to stitch these little placement lines first. Okay, now this is where I changed the design, because in the picture here, what you're supposed to do is tape all 3 flowers in place, and then it's going to come in and stitch all 3 little tack downs and the center of the big flower. And so it's not going to stop. It will cut your thread and then jump to the next one, but the machine's not actually going to stop in between those. And so I thought, I didn't want to risk that, okay? Because sometimes, your tape may not hold, your foot can catch on your tape, stuff like that. So what I did is I took the design into the Bernina software program, and I separated each little tack down. So each tack down is going to be a separate stitch out. So we can just hold or tape one flower in place, it'll stitch that tack down, the machine will stop, then we can hold or tape the second one in place. So you can, if you want to, you can tape the flowers down. I didn't, and so, but if you're gonna hold them the way I'm gonna hold them, just don't sew through your fingers. And so what I did is I just kind of held them down and then started the machine sewing, and once it's sewed a few stitches, it's going to be tacked down, and then you can kind of let go of it, and it's going to stop after it stitches this one. So if you're using Kimberbell's original file, it's not going to stop in between these. So therefore I would probably tape it down good. Okay, and they were doing the bigger one. They'd had one of the small ones here, and then they were placing the bigger flower here. And so just kind of center it over that placement line. Start stitching this one. And then this one. And so if you wanted to, you could actually pick a different color to stitch the 3 centers of these flowers, and then you would be able to change it to a different color for the yellow flowers. So do your centers whatever color you want. I just did them all brown. And so the last one is going to be the center of the yellow flower. I didn't cut that thread. Okay, and it's done. And Bailey pointed out, actually none of them are really centered. I kind of moved them. So I did better when I was stitching it at home. So be a little more careful where you're placing your flower and try to get them centered, but I just figure, okay, it gives it character. And so what you'll do now is you will unhoop it and then just trim it down to that 6.5 by 8.5 size. And you'll be done for October.